Hi guys! So I am going to do a quick review on the book of Deuteronomy from chapters 1 to chapters 34. I'm just going to pull one or two points out from each chapter just to remind us what we've read in each chapter. So join me and thank you for your patience with me as I go through these chapters in the book of Deuteronomy. And then we'll move on to the next book, the book of Joshua. That's exciting. For a quick review on each chapter in the book of Deuteronomy, in chapters 1, Moses recaps on the history of Israel, the defeat of the Amorites, and appointment of deputies, 12 spies on how Israel were afraid to enter the Promised Land. In chapters 2, Moses continues to recap as he tells the children of Israel about the passing through of Edom. In this chapter also, we learn that Moab, Kadesh Barnea, and Ammon were spared because of Lot. Then there was the defeat of Sion, the king of Heshban. Moses continues to tell the history of Israel in chapters 3. And Og, king of Bashan, was defeated. The Reubenites, Gadites, and half the tribe of Manasseh were given the land east of Jordan. It was in this chapter also Moses told them that he was not allowed to enter the Promised Land because God was angry with him on account of them, the Israelites. He did not mention what he did at Meribah to make God angry. In chapters 4, Moses continues to speak to the children of Israel, telling them that God made Israel a great nation. And also he gives them laws which are unrivaled among the nations. He warned that not a word is to be added or taken away from the laws of God. And God expects complete obedience to his 10 commandments. And idolatry is an abomination to him and must not be done or practiced. In chapters 5, God spoke to Moses and made covenant again with Israel. The 10 commandments were repeated in full, and Israel responded in fear to God. In chapter 6, the instructions continues, and he said, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one Lord, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength." This command must be in the heart, bound on the hand and forehead and on the doorpost. In this chapter, the Israelites warned not to forget the Lord in times of prosperity and go after other gods. Children are to be instructed in the commands of God. In chapter 7, God continues to give Moses the command for his people to completely destroy the Canaanites and their culture and abominations and not make covenants with them. The Israelites are a holy people, set apart from others. And prosperity and abundant blessings is promised in return for their obedience. In chapter 8, we learn how God humbled and tested the Israelites by subjecting them to 40 years in the wilderness. Then God gave them manna so that it will be fully known that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeded out of the mouth of God. This was also said by Jesus himself when Satan came and tempted him in the wilderness when he was on earth. In this chapter, chapter 8, God also warns against pride during times of prosperity. And Moses also warns to not forget God at all. Otherwise, there is punishment. The people will perish. In chapter 9, Moses told the children of Israel that the battles ahead will be difficult, but the Lord will go before them as a consuming fire. He also reminded them that they must not be prideful when God grants them the victory, because their success will not be based because of their righteousness, but because of the wickedness and indignation of the people against God. In chapter 10, new tablets of stone were to be placed in the ark, and they were made to replace the smashed ones written on them by God Himself. The Lord is the God of gods. The Israelites are commanded to serve Him wholeheartedly, and God reminded them to love strangers, for they were strangers themselves in the land of Egypt. In chapter 11, Moses recaps on God's greatness against Egypt and against Dathan and Abiram. The good things, in the promised land, and the dangers of turning to serve other gods. The blessings that will flow for obedience, but the outcome is the choice of a blessing or a curse. In chapters 12, Moses told them to destroy other nations' gods, including their high places, and God is to be worshipped in His chosen place. They must bring offerings to the place that God chooses, and they must spill the blood and cover it with dust. And blood is life, and it's not to be eaten. Again, the warning not to follow other gods. In chapters 13, Moses continues to give commands regarding false gods, false worship, false prophets, false miracles, and false dreams. The penalty for apostasy is stoning, even if the offender is a near relative. In chapter 14, Moses instructs on the list of clean and unclean animals. The tithe is to be offered up in a prescribed place and enjoyed in a ceremonial meal. If distance prevented the easy transport of the animals, they could exchange their tithe for money, and then use the money to tithe with when they came to the tabernacle. In chapter 15, Moses continues his instructions on all debt cancellations after 7 years, and being generous to the poor and setting slaves free. In chapter 16, Moses instructs on observing the Passover, the Feast of Weeks, the Harvest Festival, and eating unleavened bread. Passover sacrifices must be at a prescribed place. He commanded that appointed judges and officers must be impartial and not take bribes. Trees built or placed next to altars are forbidden. And chapter 17, Moses continues to speak that the sacrifices offered are to be without blemish. Worship of false god is punishable. 3 witnesses are required for a capital offense. God also will give Israel a king when they ask for one, and the king shall not have many wives. In chapter 18, Moses confirms that the Lord is the inheritance of the Levites, and all Levites have equal rights to the offerings. Canaanite occult practices and sacrifices are forbidden, and the Lord will raise up a prophet like Moses who must be obeyed. False prophets whose words does not come to pass must die. In chapter 19, he instructs that 3 cities of refuge are to be designated and made easily accessible as a safe escape for people who accidentally kill someone. Those who commit premeditated murder are not allowed refuge, but must die. It also says removing your neighbor's landmark is forbidden, and 2 or 3 witnesses are required for a prosecution. In chapter 20, Moses told them that the priests will speak words of encouragement to all those who are about to go into battle. Those soldiers with obligations and those that have a faint heart are sent back home. In battle with the Canaanites, their cities are to be utterly destroyed. During a siege, trees that yield fruit are not to be cut down. In chapter 21, Moses mentioned that favoritism must not be shown between sons. The eldest son is always the one to be first in line for inheritance. In chapter 22, Moses gives the 4 laws of separation. No sowing your vineyard with different kinds of seeds. No plowing with a donkey and an ox together. No wearing of clothes made with different materials. And then both the man and the woman in an adulterous relationship will be condemned to death. If a man rape a betrothed woman, he shall be stoned to death, and the woman herself suffers no penalty. In chapter 23, Moses continues on instructing who are excluded from the congregation of Israel and identified those who are illegitimate down to the 10th generation from the assembly. The Ammonites and Moabites are to be excluded from the assembly, but Edomites, who are brothers, and Egyptians are not. Then in chapter 23 also says shovels must be carried to bury body waste, and the Israelites will provide asylum for foreign escaped slaves. Prostitution is prohibited and disallowed, and vows must be kept. It is a sin to make a vow and not keep it. In chapter 24, a man will not be required to go to war for the first year of his marriage. Moses said the man must not remarry his divorced wife. Then do not take someone's livelihood of milestone as a pledge, and kidnapping is forbidden. Then when a pledge was taken for a loan, it had to be received at the door of the man's house in a way that kept the poor man's dignity. The pledge of a garment must be returned to a poor man before nightfall, and poor workers must be paid daily. And a person will be put to death for his own sin, not for the sin of his son, or his son will not bear the sin of the father. And his word says we must be compassionate to the poor and the fatherless, and leave the gleanings of the vineyards and the farms for the poor. Then in chapter 25, Moses continues his instructions. He said that the ox must not be muzzled when it treads the corn or the grain. And the brother of a married man who died without children must marry his brother's widow. And if he refused to marry her, the widow may remove his shoes and spit in his face. And if a woman gets involved in her husband's fight and grab the man by the genitals, her hand must be chopped off. And then weights must be equally measured. It also said that the Amalekites must be completely destroyed. In chapter 26, Moses spoke about the first fruits that must be offered in the designated place. Then there is a Thanksgiving summary of God's deliverance of the Israelites from Egypt. Also, prayers for the giving of tithes are also commanded by Moses, and mandate for complete obedience to God is made. God proclaims again that Israelites are his special people. In chapter 27, Moses commanded Israel to build an altar of whitewashed stones at Mount Ebal, and the stones will have the words of the law written on them. Half the tribe will gather at Mount Gerizim to utter God's blessings. The other half will gather at Mount Ebal to utter his curses. The long list of those who are cursed are written. Those three of those curses are disobedient to parents, lying with animals, and taking bribes. In chapter 28, Moses gave the blessings for obeying God, the fruit of your body, the produce of your ground, and etc., and many more. And a very longer list he gave for the curses for disobedience to God, including being scattered among all people. Note, the curses for disobedience are more, much more, than the blessings for obedience. In chapter 29, God reminds Israel of his provision for them in the wilderness, and the covenant is renewed. Then there's harsh punishment is promised to the covenant breaker. Some things the Lord has kept secret, but he has revealed the law so the people may demonstrate their obedience or disobedience. In chapter 30, Moses reaffirms to Israel that after they disobeyed and is scattered everywhere, God will bring them back to prosper. The hearts of the Israelites will be circumcised, and further blessings ensued. The law is revealed, and therefore it's accessible, and there is no excuse for not obeying it. Then he also gave them the choice between life and death. He set that before them, and he said, Heaven and earth are the witnesses. And he advised to choose life that you and your children, he said, may live. Then in chapter 31, it was Moses' 120th birthday. On that day, he told the Israelites that he cannot go on and he cannot come and go as before. And moreover, he cannot cross over the Jordan to the promised land. So God, in that chapter, commanded the Israelites to be strong, and the same will happen to their enemies as happened to Sion and Og. Then Moses commanded Joshua to be strong. God's words also were placed in the ark and will serve as a witness against the Israelites. The elders and officials gathered to hear God's lyrics that he told Moses to write in his very own song as a witness against the Israelites. In chapters 32, God dictates the lyrics of his song that will be held as a witness against the children of Israel. And the song is firstly about God's greatness and his justice, then how the child has forsaken his father. The song goes on to remind of God's faithfulness and Israel's apostasy. It states of God's consequent self-withdrawal and chastisement. He said, I kill and I make alive. I wound and I heal. God is the rock, and it's that God is as the rock has been used constantly in the song. Then Moses encouraged the people again to obey the law. Then God commanded Moses to go up to Mount Nebo and view the promised land and then die. In chapter 33, Moses gave his final blessings to the generations of Jacob, naming each tribe of Israel. God is Israel's refuge and strength. And then in chapter 34, a final chapter, Moses made his final journey, climbing up to Mount Nebo. Then he took a good long look at the promised land. Promised land all around. Then Moses died at the age of 120 years. The Lord himself buried Moses in an unknown and unfounded grave. Then Israel mourned for Moses. No one after Moses knew the Lord like Moses did, face to face. Thus ends the recap and the review of the entire book of Deuteronomy. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for reading the Word of God with me, staying through with me. I know it's been a long haul, but thank you for being patient and going through the book with me chapter by chapter, and also allowing the Holy Spirit to teach us and minister to us what He wants us to know from this chapter. I am going to move on, and I'm headed now to the book of Joshua, chapter by chapter, and I will be making my Bible reading post soon. Thanks again. Stay tuned and stay blessed, everybody, with much love. Mwah!